Ladies and gentlemen, it's 7:30, so welcome to what I think will be a fascinating evening. Before I introduce our speaker, it's worth remembering that last year was an important year for celebrating things. 200 years since the first public railway, and 100 years since the exposition in Paris that gave rise to the name and the movement Art Deco, which is entirely appropriate because Richmond Station, which last year we gave an award to for the fantastic restoration that's been done, was an example of Art Deco. Now, our speaker this evening is Benedict O'Looney, who is a very distinguished architect who did architecture at Yale and seems to have spent most of his life on this side of the pond. He started his own practice in 2005, but he worked with some leading firms of architects. I think he worked on the North Greenwich Station, the renewal of Paddington Station.
Yeah.
And his particular cabbage patch, if I could put it this way, is southeast London, Peckham. And you've restored Peckham Station.
Yeah, we've been working on Peckham Station and the Peckham Mosque.
And his practice has done lots of projects in southeast London. Now, as well as being an architect and an architect historian, Benny has also taught for many years. So I'm going to shut up and ask you to give him a warm welcome, and over to you, Benny.
Thanks. Okay, it's great to see so many folk here this evening. It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight, and it's been my great honor and fortune to be working on your local railway station, which I've come to love very much. And so soon after we started working on the project, I met the team at the Richmond Society and volunteered this talk because I thought we were about to have a kind of interesting journey, and it turned out that way. And so now, as the job is almost finished, there's a few small bits and pieces still we're working on the facade and the booking hall, but it seemed like a good opportunity to share with you all what we've been doing. My work on Richmond Station begins with our local station in southeast London, Peckham Station, that I've been working on pretty much since set our practice up in the early 2000s. And one of the reasons I wanted to come and give this talk and connect with you all this evening is I'm a keen member of the Peckham Society. I'm on the committee of the Peckham Society and Peckham Heritage. I'm also the chair of Southwark's Conservation Area Advisory Group, and we're like crazy about the architecture history around where we are in Southwark. And our Peckham Station, although it's looking from the outside pretty splendid now, we've just finished a couple years ago a restoration of the roof and the outside. When I first pitched up there was looking pretty rough. It's a big, tough urban railway station, and large parts of it were boarded up in the 1960s. And so our work there has been progressively kind of opening up and rediscovering parts of this mighty, fine urban railway station, in this case designed by the great London, Brighton and South Coast Railway under the architecture of the great Charles Henry Driver, another important railway architect. And as we began to investigate this kind of lost parts of this station, it's a busy downtown station with 4 platforms. It's a junction station like Richmond. But much of it was sort of mothballed in the post-war years. And as we began to find our way into this fabulous Victorian building, here you can see this kind of forgotten cast iron staircase, we began to see the familiar colors of the Southern Railway, which is the main theme of our talk this evening, which is this kind of green and cream. And you can see the kind of grumbling sign suggesting that there was a billiard hall up in this giant disused waiting room upstairs. We've done about 5 projects at Peckham Rye Station over about 20 years. And one of the interesting ones along the way, early ones, was to reopen the lost station loos, or as they're rather attractively called on the drawings, the sanitary courts. And yeah, we're looking also at the sanitary courts. There's a huge, massive sanitary courts underneath Brighton Station that people are hoping to open up in time too. And so as we found our way into this space, we noticed there was this magnificent mosaic floor. And we learned more about the project, as we have with the Richmond scheme, because the railway companies have preserved a really fabulous set of the original contract drawings. So there you can see on the right the drawing by the Southern Railway architects as they added the new sanitary courts as a part of a general reordering of Peckham Rye Station in 1935. And so there more of this kind of green paint and lovely tile work, and in particular this super Jesse Rust patterned glass mosaic floor, which appears in lots of Southern Railway stations across the network, and particularly around southwest London. And so it's something that we're highlighting and doing some research around, a Battersea-based glass mosaic company. And so these had been mothballed too. We found all kinds of amazing graffiti on the cubicle walls. We kind of left as much of the original paintwork as we could find, and quite some discoveries there. Now these are a part of a smart restaurant that's opened up in the north wing of Peckham Rye. So you can actually, if you find yourselves passing through Peckham Rye Station and feel the need to spend a penny, or if you enjoy a bit of architectural tourism, head into the restaurant and you can have a look at these loos. So this was our first connection with the work of the Southern Railway Architects Department in the interwar period, in the 1930s, of which, of course, Richmond Station is a really fabulous example. Our latest project at our local Peckham Rye Station involved the restoration of the roof and the facade. And here we can see how we've recast the lost cast iron cresting, a powerful kind of Gothic revival feature to the roof of the building, and cleaned the brickwork, restored a lot of the stonework, recast the cast iron rainwater goods, and entirely repointed the elevation. And so here we've brought one of the motifs from the Southern Railway scene, which comes later after the Big Four grouping in 1923. We've brought that Southern Railway green to the windows and some of the cast iron work. So to Richmond Station. And here we can see a photograph of the station in the early days, shortly after it was built. It's of course not the first station at Richmond. The Victorians built railways to Richmond in the 1840s, but it was all set for a great renewal in the interwar period. In 1935 is the date we find on the contract drawings. And it was a big deal when it was finished. It was one of the most conspicuous works in central London of the Southern Railway Architects Department. And this is a part of a general kind of renewal of the railways in the 1930s, a time that Victorian architecture was very unfashionable. And the Southern Railway were doing some really interesting things. The Southern Railway comprises many different, at the big grouping of the railways in 1923, 123 railway companies across Britain were grouped into 4 main groups: the Southern Railway, the Great Western Railway, London and North Eastern, and the London and North Western Railway. And the Southern Railway, I suppose like their predecessor, the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, were very kind of go ahead, using new materials and technologies. And one of the things that was important about the interwar period was the electrification of the railways. And faster, more reliable, much cleaner trains were brought into these stations. And so a new architectural aesthetic arises, which I wanted to kind of share with you a bit this evening to give some context to the work that we finished, or we've been doing at Richmond Station these last few years. So one of the things, as I mentioned, that gives kind of force to the work that we're doing is having access to the original drawings, so we can really understand how the buildings were before the various kind of changes that happened, particularly in the post-war period. It's worth highlighting a bit about the chief architect of the Southern Railway, and that's the great James Robb Scott. James Robb Scott was born in Glasgow in 1882, and he was the son of an architect, Andrew Robb Scott, who builds the North British Hotel beside Edinburgh Station. And James Robb Scott, the son, was obviously an inventive and energetic character. He articles with Scottish architects initially, and then quite possibly through an introduction of his father, Andrew Robb Scott, he gets connected with a very well-known London practice called Belcher and Jose. And John James Jose was another Scottish architect, and there's a long-standing tradition of Scottish architects coming and really shaking things up in London. Think about the Adam brothers, who gave much impetus to the 18th century scene. They're Scottish architects. In the 19th century, architects like Belcher and or Burnett, and architects like Basil Spence in more recent times. There's always been a great contribution of Scots to the London architecture scene. And probably the most spectacular work in the early period of James Robb Scott is the rebuilding of Waterloo Station in the 1910s and 1920s, of which the fabulous Victory Arch is one of the most exciting features. So I thought to introduce a little bit about the master that the young James Robb Scott went to work for in 1905 and 1906. And he seems to have been of sufficient quality to be made their chief draftsman. And so let's look at the buildings of John James Joas in partnership with Belcher and Joas, one of the really celebrated British practices in the late Victorian, Edwardian, into the 20th century. And two buildings by Joas that can be seen here in London is the former Mappin and Webb on the north side of Oxford Street, shown on the left next to Waring and Gillows, and then the Royal Insurance Building on the corner of Piccadilly and St. James. And these are really quite exciting Edwardian buildings using the new iron frames and steel frames that were coming into London in the early 20th century, but also very kind of confident, quite flamboyant classical detailing that has the sort of abstraction that hints at kind of modernism that comes in the interwar period. And John James Joas, James Robb Scott's kind of master, is a part of this journey into modernism. And another interesting work by John James Joas is the Brewer Street car park. And there you can see how these classical architects who were doing really quite splendid things in the Edwardian period into the interwar period begin to adopt modernism. And here, again, concrete frames, in this case, this lovely faience cladding, which are the kind of new materials that the railway architects and new building types like garages begin to adopt. So here we've got a view of the fabulous Victory Arch at Waterloo Station. And the design of Waterloo was already well underway, started by the London and South Western Railway in the 1910s, and then after the kind of hiatus of the war, they decided to create a great monumental memorial to the members of the London and South Western Railway who served and perished in the First World War. And so here we can see this magnificent, almost Roman triumphal arch built at the far northern end of Waterloo Station. And so we can see that James Robb Scott really has kind of absorbed the kind of energy of the Beaux-Arts movement that was happening across the world, particularly in Britain and France, of course, in Paris, in the early 20th century. We can see that he's a real master of it with these sculptural groups. And even though Waterloo Station is a kind of flat roof station, creating this great lunette above the entry stairs into the station really gives a monumental character that evokes a Roman triumphal arch. And here we can see these magnificent drawings done by James Robb Scott and his team in the 1920s. So with the ambition of the Southern Railway, they start building new stations, and new blood comes into the London and South Western Railway architects obviously are adopted by the Southern Railway, and new people come in to give great impetus to their work of a series of new stations. The drawings are beautifully made on ink, probably on vellum, with the use of watercolor to call out the different materials and the different details. And so here we can see some of the new stations built by the Southern Railway in the mid-1920s. Ramsgate Station, Margate Station, there you can see a similar kind of feel to the big triumphal arch at the Victory Arch at Margate, and equally at Hastings Station. And these all, I think, can be firmly attributed to James Robb Scott. As you can see, the kind of eye pulls them together, and we can see that he was quite a talented and inventive designer. Here, a recent photograph. They've been doing some work at the at Margate Station, led by an important strand to this project here in Richmond, which is the care and the energy of the Railway Heritage Trust, who have substantially co-funded the work that we've been doing at Richmond Station. And they're a small but quite wonderful organization, a part of the wider Network Rail organization, that have a particular responsibility for the historic buildings, often railway stations that are listed or in conservation areas, and really like to work with the community to kind of make their money go further, make the railway companies' money go further, and the Railway Heritage Trust. And that partnership is a big part of whatever success we've had here in Richmond, which is a kind of joint funded thing. The lead funders, of course, the South Western Railway, the train operating company, who've been using that station for years, but substantial contributions by the Railway Heritage Trust and Richmond Council. And I feel so fortunate to have been working on this, and it's through getting to know the Railway Heritage Trust, Anna Gips, and the team on our projects in Peckham that brought me to this project in Richmond. Here we can see the interior of Margate Station has been recently restored, bringing back some of those characteristic cream and green tones of the Southern Railway in the 1920s, and this great kind of vaulted ceiling painted this vanilla tone appropriate for a seaside town, this gateway to the seaside in Kent. And another motif that we're coming to see and recognize in these remarkable and listed stations built in the 1920s and 30s is the use of this robust parquet floor, which really takes a beating and and can be brought up looking quite fine. Here, another station designed by James Robb Scott, assisted by the well-known modernist in his early part of his career, Ramsgate Station. And we can see, again, a kind of confident, Beaux-Arts, classical, Roman style, very much inspired by the new stations that the United States were building. And there was a trip for many of the engineers and architects for the railways out to see the new stations being built in America in this period. Many, though sadly in America, have been closed down with the kind of power of the highway lobby in the post-war years, massively kind of constricting and unraveling the United States railway network. So a really gorgeous classical station in Ramsgate with this, again, these vaulted kind of almost Roman-like, Roman baths-like circulating areas, which, well, I commend this to you and also commend to you all the fine work that the Railway Heritage Trust has been doing with this restoration project. So things change into the 1930s, and we can see how the Southern Railway begins to adopt modernist architecture, but they don't entirely leave the classical architecture behind. You can see here almost temple-like front, a quattro-style temple-like portico there to the town-facing large, that's called the upside booking hall. There's also a downside booking hall on the other side, which I'll tell you a bit about later. And adding to this magnificent composition is this lovely clock tower with lifts and circulating spaces spanning the tracks at this super junction station. So this is really the kind of journey from classical architecture into early modernism that we also see at Richmond Station. Here at Surbiton Station, it survives magnificently, and the work of James Robb Scott and his team is wonderfully preserved because this building is listed, which is such a fine thing. It was listed in 1980 and captures it before any depredations to the station. And that's been super important for our work at Richmond because we needed a kind of source to go back to learn about lots of the details. Here we can see the bold modernism and this magnificent tower. Perhaps the white stucco-fronted work hints at the cleanliness of the new electrified railways that were running into this station. Electrified suburban lines with the steam-hauled big expresses heading down to Portsmouth and Southampton and distant places. And if we go into the inside of Surbiton, we can see so many of the details that were lost at Richmond Station, and this became this great resource for us to begin to understand the big-scale moves of the architects and the small detailing ideas. So we can see, like we find at Richmond Station, this lovely travertine, maybe even Roman travertine lining to the floor, to the walls. The floor survives from the 1930s, and you can get a glimpse of that floor if you go to the gym next to Richmond Station. On the left-hand side, there's stairs that go up to a gym, and you can, it's worth poking your nose in there if you're going to the gym or not going to the gym. And you can see this lovely handrail that survives, and the floor survives in there too, that was lost at Richmond Station in the 1980s. And so for us enthusiasts for historic railway architecture, listing is a really good thing because it really preserves these buildings so much better. And there seems to have been a debate in 1980 whether Richmond should be listed, as it was a really splendid example, or whether Surbiton should be listed. Decided to list Surbiton, and unfortunately, not long after this, with the launch of Network Southeast, they decided to use Richmond Station as a kind of test bed for the new 1980s railway station. So they set about covering up all the 1930s work, thankfully preserving a good deal of it, but taking away the lovely canopy that was on the outside. So here the floor, the stairs, and these interesting cast glass lenses throwing tons of daylight into the station. And so one of the joys of working on this project has been collaborating with the team at Southwestern Railway, Chris Gregory and Brian Robiliard. And they, after seeing what we could achieve at Richmond Station, have decided to open up the disused downside booking hall at Surbiton Station, which has been closed up since the 1970s. And there we find a wonderful time capsule of 1930s railway architecture well preserved. And there we've been looking in close detail at these really impressive modernist glass windows that use cast glass and these kind of new patent glass products that were being made. My first kind of journey into that world was working on this mighty department store in Peckham, across the street from Peckham Rise Station, formerly Holdren's department store. You can see, like Richmond Station, it was in the architecture press back in the very same moment, 1935. And above a giant suspended ceiling, we discovered this fabulous glass vault. So working with the doughty Afghan immigrant Akbar Khan, we removed about 1,000 square meters of suspended ceiling to reveal this fabulous glass roof. So if you find yourselves in Peckham on Rye Lane, go across the street from the station and have a look in the excellent Khan's Bargains. They've got just about everything you could conceivably want in that shop there. And you can see the 1,000 glass lenses that we've revealed above a suspended ceiling. And so there you can see the photograph in the top left from the architecture press. And so so when we find these things at Surbiton and Richmond Station, it's a part of this kind of journey of learning about the architecture where I live and work in Peckham. So here at Surbiton, we can see the downside booking hall. We've just put in a listed building application to open this up, perhaps as a bookshop or a restaurant. We're not quite sure what's going to happen there, but we're trying to get it into a place where it can be open to the public again, and a magnificent annex to the mighty Surbiton Station. Other key stations from this period include Wimbledon Station, and here we can see lovely kind of low-slung classical design with wings of shopping parades on either side. And this hints at another thing that was happening with the Southern Railway, is they were not only renewing their stations, but they were doing kind of urban developments around the station, where the stations were, making lucrative use of these busy town center sites by little rows of shopping parades. And you see that, of course, at Richmond with the two embracing wings flanking the main booking hall. Another noteworthy station from this period is Tolworth Station on the Chessington branch line. In the latter part of the 1930s, a series of fantastic modernist stations were built by James Robb Scott and the team from the Southern Railway architects. A line that was initially going to go to Dorking, but with the outbreak of the Second World War, work stopped, and it only made its way as far as Chessington South. But they're really exciting works of this new architectural language using what we call ferro-concrete construction, which you see magnificently in these canopies. And hopefully in the fullness of time, they'll be restored to reveal the glass lenses, the circular lenses, which would let the daylight down onto the platforms. And so James Robb Scott and his team were very ambitious in the use of new technologies in their stations. And all kinds of interesting things survive behind the scenes in these stations, although many of the public circulation spaces have been kind of improved or modernized. Still, there's a lot of joinery kind of survives. So back to Richmond. When we began, we were initially commissioned to do a kind of study looking at how we could re-find some of the historic character of the station and begin to identify what historic features would need to be restored to bring it back. And the principal thing was cleaning the facade, remaking this bronze canopy, sorting out the flagpole and this confident lettering to the top of the building. And one of the things that immediately occurred to me, having done some work lighting our mighty, fabulous Victorian Peckham Rise Station, one of the things that immediately occurred to me is this was a kind of real opportunity for architectural lighting too. And so here we can see the station in the post-war period. In the 1980s, Network Southeast decided to kind of refresh the booking hall and put this not so nice kind of cladding not only around the canopy, but this fantastic 1930s frieze inside. And so here we can see on the left how we met the station a couple or 2 years ago, and then on the right you can see it restored following a series of different projects on the outside and the inside. There, the interior of Richmond with the W.H. Smith that came into the booking hall and the coffee shop and the former tourist information kiosk. Now we've remade the elevation to the periphery and put the information kiosk and the shop, a new shop, a bakery that'll be opening soon, in where the W.H. Smith, who decided to pull out of the station. And we can also see in the left photograph, on the right photograph, that we've restored this fantastic modernist frieze that runs around the periphery of the room. Our work was aided by some super period photographs, but only 3 or 4, so we had limited material to work from. But like Holdren's on Rye Lane and like many of the other stations by the Southern Railway, they were keenly kind of promoted in the press, and so they would hire top architectural photographers to come and photograph the buildings when they were new. So this is where the information kiosk is, in the right-hand corner of the booking hall. And so the building program changed there, and we kind of came up with a new shop front that was inspired by what we learned mostly at Surbiton Station. And here a view of the other corner, the northeast corner, and we can see the wonderful kind of former booking office that was sadly reworked in the 1980s. But as much as we could, we've restored it back to the information we see. And once again, that floor, which is lost in the booking hall, can still be seen in the stair halls that flank the booking hall at Richmond. So, working closely with Anna and the team from the Railway Heritage Trust, we were really fortunate to get our hands on these beautifully drawn drawings that were the original contract drawings. The only thing that kind of flummoxed us was the design of the canopy was totally different from the photographs. And so we really, and the clock, as you can see, is a different design. But what was apposite for us in this restoration project was how did they build that canopy? And so that was one of the first tasks we looked at. And typical of the way we work in our studio is we made a pretty carefully observed computer model to begin to show the team, the Railway Heritage Trust, Lord Hendy, the rail minister has taken a really positive interest in this project, and the team from South Western Railway. We made a series of views that we thought reflected how we could make this back into a much more congenial and visually coordinated booking hall for Richmond. There's the team, me and Nick and James at one of our favorite summertime haunts in Peckham, drawing the view from the multi-story car park. And the photograph on the right shows the excellent Brian from South Western Railway, who was really the lead on this project from the client side, really passionate about railway architecture. Lee Greeley from the contractors Walkers, who ran the remaking of the canopy. Stuart from Transport Signs, looking downwards. The signage was absolutely key. We made quite a lot of the 1930s signage on Richmond Station. And then Vinnie Young, the bronze worker who made this magnificent bronze fascia for the canopy. So when we started doing this, thankfully we had Surbiton Station to go and look at. And so Nick and I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how these things worked. We didn't have detailed drawings of the canopy, but with ladders and kind of looking closely, we did a series of drawings trying to unpick how this thing worked. Not only how the fascia worked, but this all-important ley light which sits underneath, which throws the light downwards. And so armed with, and this is, I think, typical of a lot of us, the way us architects work, is we try to, for example, our work at Peckham Rise Station, there are quite a few buildings designed by Charles Henry Driver, and so to figure out the things we're needing to restore at Peckham, we've looked at quite a lot of different stations, like Battersea Park, Denmark Hill down the road. For example, the iron cresting that was lost at Peckham in the 1920s survives at Denmark Hill, so we could look at that detail and see how we could bring it to Peckham. And this is typical of the way we work. Here, computer model looking at how we could remake the canopy to the outside, and some views showing what we thought we could do with the outside, redeploying the flagpoles and remaking this magnificent bronze canopy. One of the first things that happened on site, few of you all will have seen, because it was done in the darkest hours, what we call engineering hours, between 1 and 4 o'clock in the morning. When you guys are all sleeping and no one's using the station, that's when you can do some of the heavier stuff. And so, again, Brian had an inventive idea of, instead of throwing for a big scaffold on the outside of the station, he thought, well, there's this company that uses this machine that cleans the outside. And so there's this pressurized little room that goes up and, like a limpet, sort of sucks onto the facade of the building. And this guy, kind of dressed up like a spaceman, does his kind of cleaning thing in this pressurized sort of environment. And over the course of 3 or 4 nights, they worked across the whole facade, cleaning the lichens and the moss off, and bringing this fabulous Portland stone facade back to something that approached its original design. And so there you can see the Portland stone cleaned. And we can also see this amazing Swedish granite base. And so one of the things that we quickly noticed as we began to kind of compare Surbiton to what we found at Richmond was actually Richmond Station had much fancier materials than Surbiton Station, while Surbiton is mostly rendered and has some very fine ferroconcrete work. At Richmond, of course, one of the great town centers in the capital, it's all really fancy materials. So Swedish granite to the base, beautifully detailed Portland stone above, concealing an innovative iron steel frame. And then, of course, the horizontally oriented criddle windows, that kind of key early modernist windows made in Essex at the great Criddle window factory. And so one of our great challenges was figuring out how to remake the fascia, this copper bronze fascia. And in the first, the folk at Southwestern Railway wanted to make it out of powder-coated aluminum. And I thought, well, hang on, if we're going to go to all the trouble of making this thing, you should make it out of bronze, because what it was made out of originally. And one of the things that I was particularly interested in was something robust that would last a long time, but bronze weathers much more interestingly. Powder-coated aluminum kind of just stays the same and gets duller and eventually kind of gets chipped. But bronze is the real material. And all the cost for doing this was in the handwork making it. The material was broadly the same cost, and so worked very hard on persuading, and with the great help of Anna Gips from the Railway Heritage Trust, we persuaded Southwestern Trains to actually make this out of the materials it was made of. There were few traces of that. All we had is these couple of photographs, but we knew from the photographs that it was quite complex and it flared out to the sides. And this was, I think, the main challenge, was figuring out how to make this canopy. And so again, we used the computer model to kind of look at a framing device, and then we had to figure out how to illuminate it. So working with the excellent team, my friend Nick at Iguzzini and the folk at Transport Signs, we kind of devised an illuminated frieze and a ley light. And so there you can see the thing taking shape, with the excellent Peter Young on the right-hand side, who I've been working with for 20 years. We quite like our metal roofs. And so while the original people who were lined up to make this, who did theatrical canopies, I thought, like, where do you find someone to make a bronze canopy? And then I thought, well, Shaftesbury Avenue, there are all these theaters that have bronze canopies. And so I thought, all right, let's try that route. We found someone, and then at the sort of 11th hour, they said they couldn't do the kind of flaring out curvy bit at the corner, which is like the key thing. And so we were like, oh dear. But then from my work on the Croydon Mosque, I remembered, of course, Peter, who I'm very fond of, and we were always like, oh my God, these guys are amazing craftsmen. And then I realized they would be the people to make this thing. And so we ordered pretty much all the large sheets of bronze in the country at that very moment, hauled them down to this workshop in Thornton Heath, and Peter and his son, Vinny, on the far right and far left, made this thing really quite amazing, and it was shiny like a new penny when there you can see it in the workshop up very close to the IKEA in Thornton Heath. And I cannot commend to you too highly the work from Peter's Roofing and Zinc and Copper Canopies. Those guys are amazing. And so they're very exciting moment, folks, seeing it on site with the Richmond signage beautifully made by the good folk at Transport Signs. Oh my God, this was exciting. We've been lucky to work in zinc before. We've gilded things, we've worked in cast iron, but we've never worked in bronze. So this was something that was like, wow, that's the biz. And so there's Nick and I on the right inspecting this thing. The good folk from Zinc and Copper Canopies installing it on site. And the most complicated thing, of course, was the curvy edges. And that was subjected to a lot of heat and strain as they gently kind of bent it and fabricated out of a lot of small pieces. But they had the good sense to use the soldering wire to connect the bits of bronze. It was actually the exact same bronze used, so they could polish out where all the joints were. But if you look closely, the corner bits are weathered slightly differently because they've been subjected to a lot more heat and kind of manual work. And that's just the thing that we wanted to capture by using this natural material that it was originally made from, that we saw, of course, at Surbiton Station, was getting that, seeing how it would weather and having that sort of complex character. Another exciting thing about the canopy remaking was remaking the glass lens, the ferro-concrete that beautifully let the daylight in. So this had all been covered up in the 1980s, but there you can see when things get covered up, as we found in Peckham Station, people forget about things, the rain gets in, things go from bad to worse. Here you can see a lot of the concrete has spalled off the ferro-concrete, the rebars in there. And so we're like, cripes, we're going to have to remake this thing. The photograph on the right is quite interesting. This shows the edge of the canopy. And what I was hunting for was any traces of where the original bronze canopy was. And I found the smallest, most delicate line that suggested the shape of this sort of flared out shape. And so I was like, well, we had nothing to go on. So a big part of the work that we do is you're kind of like archaeologists, like, wow, how did this work? And I knew there'd be something where the the bronze met the Portland stone. And so I carefully surveyed this, and then I found the exact same shape on the other side, which made it clear that that was the shape of the canopy. We were aided by these lovely drawings from the Southern Railway architects, but they showed a different design to the canopy. If we look here, for example, we can see it was a glass frieze all the way around and didn't flare out. But the photographs and those little telltale signs on site guided me to this flaring out double curve design. And one of the kind of fun things about redoing the glass lenses is the same company, Glasscrete, still goes today. They're famous for doing pavement lights all across London, but they were also in the 1930s looking at all these new details and materials as architects since time immemorial have embraced daylight. And here, using the new technology of lightweight ferro-concrete construction, they devised these canopies made from concrete and glass lenses. So we'd seen them at the department store in Peckham, and if we look, we've managed to get our hands on one of the catalogs from the company, and you can see how they really celebrate the work of the mighty Southern Railway. There, the fabulous Southampton station shown in one of their catalogs. And you can see also they designed these lights that Brian found someone to restore the lights at Richmond Station. So there you can see all the glass lenses set in place, ready for concrete to be poured around them, to fix them, and to create the weatherproof finishing thing. And here is a view inside the ley light to the periphery of the canopy, with the brackets fabricated by the canopy folk. And there you can see, tied into the ferro-concrete, remains of the old canopy that we found inside. And we can also see how, working with Iguzzini, we found these amazing bendy lights that could bend around the corner and do different things, illuminating horizontally the signage and illuminating vertically down into the ley light. And there we did a mock-up. There's Nick Constantine from Iguzzini showing the floodlights that we used to illuminate the outside, which I think, folks, is one of the really best things that we've done, is to kind of illuminate this fabulous Art Deco landmark down at the sort of north end of the high street. And there you can see the beautifully fabricated ley lights, almost like, as we knew we'd get from these guys, millimeter perfect panels, all beautifully set in, that can be dismounted in order to maintain it in the fullness of time. So, such an honor to work on this, and such a treat to work with such fabulous contractors. On the inside, we can see that the glass frieze survives from the 1930s. It was so exciting to find. Sadly, in the 1980s, they banged out the corners. And so one of the main achievements on the interior work was creating the curves at the corner of the booking hall, because they had been cut out. And they were kind of the most complex bits. But amazingly, the glass frieze all survived behind the 1980s overcladding. And so what it revealed, well, there you can see some sketches that I made. We were thinking, well, how do we want to retain the old 1930s signage, but how do we introduce new signage? And using that familiar kind of technique in conservation architecture, we've kind of moved the new thing away from the old thing, so people see the old thing. You're forgiven for being flummoxed when you see the London, Midland and Scotland Railway in the booking hall now. London, Midland and Scotland Railway hasn't run to that station for at least 70 years, but the new signage hovers above the old signage that's been preserved. And so here you can see, trying to figure out, Brian wanted to create a kind of services conduit above the frieze. So wanting to figure out how to fit the new signage, a kind of a services zone, and then get the lighting working again within the frieze. So here's a little watercolor that studies it from below and above. So here you can see the finished article. you can see the frieze entirely restored at the high level. Where the travertine survives, it doesn't survive in its eternity. It doesn't all survive. I'd say about 60% of it survives, but it's been cleaned. And the ley light, not only is there a ley light to the outside, key 1930s kind of architectural motif, but there's an internal ley light that's been restored. Lost glass lenses have been refound, and we can see Brian and his contractor have remade the great chandeliers that once dominated the ceiling of this space. So we're so fortunate that so much of the 1930s work survives, and there you can see the ley light from below. And this is something that was very much of the zeitgeist of the 1930s, using these motifs. And here, to the south wall, you can see how new joinery has been introduced to create the Heidi's Bakery, which should be pretty tasty when it opens in a few months or two. And then the tourist information that had been in a kind of less than ideal kind of shipping container in the booking hall now have their own little spot with beautifully formed oak joinery. And so one of the happy things for me as a designer working on this was, for some of these smaller details, I was able just to draw it all by hand, which I love to do, an antidote to working on the computer that we spend so much time doing these days. And so we found a wonderful joiner in Southampton who made these elements. And if you look to the drawing to the top left, you can see how I spent time at Surbiton, freezing cold wintertime, out there sitting on my little stool, kind of sketching all these details. And then, although we didn't exactly reuse them at Richmond, it was that process of kind of taking on how they shaped things and personally engaging with the detailing of the Southern Railway that made it easy to kind of come up with an appropriate language for the new work that was required at Richmond. And there you can see, and an important detail, I think, folks, is that we've used salvage ironmongery. And so the things that you actually touch are artifacts from the 1920s and 1930s. And so they're a merry trip to the architectural salvage shop to look and see what sort of door handles and escutcheons and push plates, the things that we like as architects. And so there you can see, have a look, and when you go in. And then finally, here are a few slides showing the tile work. So an amazing thing that Brian's gone on to do is start clearing the paint off these beautiful tile poster panels. What's called quad royal to the left and a double royal. Actually, no, quad royal is the one on the right and the double royal is the left. And so through our work, we've been learning these poster sizes, and we've designed information panels to go into these signs. The doors, as you've noticed, have been cleaned and kind of buffed up. And we see these same doors at so many of the stations by the Southern Railway in the interwar period. One of the lovely details here on this staircase is this beautiful bronze handrail, which has sadly been overclad or added to with these not so nice yellow ones. I commend to you the bronze one next time you're walking up that staircase. And the next thing that's coming is the Crittall-inspired shop front for the bakery that's supposed to arrive next Monday. So we're excited about that. And here, kind of looking at the glazing elsewhere on the station and bringing that to this new shop front. Really interesting team of people that we've been working with here. Chris and Greg from Southwestern Railway, who I'm super grateful to. Nick, who's with us this evening from the lighting company, Aguzzini, Tom and Handry, with their amazing facade cleaning machine. Walker's zinc and copper canopy and transport signs, amongst others. It's a big team effort. So the last couple of slides I wanted to throw in for you before I pause is we've also been working on, in this case, an interwar project by the Southeastern Railway. And this is Findlater's Corner. at London Bridge from 1922. And you can see how the other railway companies were also using this modern materials, in this case, glazed ceramic from the Dalton's pottery works, here deployed on this gently kind of cambered facade, an eye catcher at the south end of London Bridge. It had fallen into pretty hard times with plants growing out of it and had been shot up for many years. It was formerly an Oddbins wine merchant. And so kind of like our work at Peckham Rye Station, I've been cycling past this thing for years, and Southwark Council has this great scheme called Cleaner, Greener, Safer. And so we made a proposal to them and said, look, this is an incredible facade. You should do something here. And so we raised a bit of money that way. And then the good folk at the Railway Heritage Trust hired us to design a kind of Beaux-Arts-inspired shopfront to go into it. And then along the way, we found this amazing mosaic, just like the mosaics that we found, this Jesse Rust glass mosaic. So next time you find yourself at London Bridge Station, have a look at this project at Findlater's Corner, the ceramic facade meeting the bridge, this incredible mosaic on Borough High Street, and then a series of 9 shop fronts around the viaduct to the back. And there you can see this fabulous Dalton's Carrara-ware stag's head made just upstream at the Dalton's pottery works between the Vauxhall and the Lambeth Bridge in Lambeth. And then finally, the last thing that we've finished, I guess around about the same time as our project at Richmond, was restoring the line maps at Victoria Station, which, like Richmond, won a Railway Heritage Award this year, or last year. And there you can see these 2 fascinating hand-painted ceramic line maps at Victoria, which were carefully restored, that show both the whole network and the suburban lines. It's just opposite the M&S on the Brighton side at Victoria Station. And then finally, right now, we're trying to kind of revive the rather beaten up, heavily bombed facade of Elephant Castle Station, which will soon find itself in the middle of a new town centre at Elephant Castle. And so we've kind of been channeling some of the things we've been learning at Richmond Station, the canopy, the poster panels, and the tile work, and bringing that to hopefully restoring another great South London railway station. I think that's it. So, and finally, contributed to a book on the architecture of Peckham a year or so ago, where you can find lots more about what we've been doing at Peckham Rye Station. Thanks very much, everyone. Oh, yeah.
Well, I think everybody will agree that we've had a masterclass in architecture and the history of railway architecture, and about a rather underestimated architect, as well as how Richmond Station was restored with the craftsmen who were required to recreate things. And, well, you can see it's a fabulous job. So anyway, Benny's kindly agreed to take some questions, and there's one over there.
Right. Benny, Richard Wolfe, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here this evening. I've been waiting so long to hear this talk. Now, listen, I've got to ask a leading question. What makes an Ivy League American architect and architectural historian become so fascinated by the English railway station? Why did you end up coming to England to do this wonderful work?
Right. Well, that's a fair question, and I'm so lucky to be doing this stuff. I born in a family of art historians. My mom used to work at the Victoria and Albert Museum, was born not far away in Fulham. And so I'm a Londoner. I kind of belong here. She married an American art historian when I was 9. I went to live in the States for like 20 years. And as you do when you're 9 years old, you think you're going to spend the rest of your life and be an American. At the moment, I'm kind of glad that I'm here in England. So when my folks retired and moved to Kent, and so I came back to London. And of course, London in the early 90s is an amazing place to do architecture. Waterloo Station, the Grimshaw Terminal was just finished. The Jubilee Line was happening, and I was lucky to be one of hundreds of architects across the capital working on the Jubilee Line. Then went to work on the Crossrail, as it was, the Elizabeth Line at Paddington with all stops. And then found myself at the mighty Nick Grimshaw's office, which was the great hotbed of rail leading, cool, high-tech modern 21st century responses to railway architecture. I learned so much there, and so fortunate to have worked there. And so then found myself, started my practice in Peckham, and we were like, whoa, this station is quite a building and so neglected. And so we started with this cool Southwark program called Cleaner, Greener, Safer. Each year we put in to fix up a couple more windows or get some wiring and lighting in the old waiting room upstairs. And it was sort of addictive. We found we could get this small bits of money and start doing things. Not very difficult to do. We could draw well enough. And so then the Railway Heritage Trust got wind of what they were doing, and I think what we were doing, and I think they really like it when local communities kind of get involved in restoration of their local kind of historic assets. And so that made our work go much further. And then the loos, the sanitary courts, and the North Wing. And then finally, a couple of years ago, this big facade project, which involved remaking quite a lot of lost Victorian stuff. And I've been teaching most of my career, and so having friends who are architecture historians, they all kind of piled in with info and helped me out. A paint expert friend taught me how to make paint scrapes and got a bunch of volunteers, and we repainted lots of lost paint work at Peckham. And historian friends have taught me about Driver, and as I was rather anxiously taking the train here this evening, referring to an email by my dear friend Stephen Robb, who had done the biography of James Robb Scott for the excellent Dictionary of Scottish Architects online. So there's friends have kind of guided me, but I think the key folk are the trust, the Railway Heritage Trust, and the confidence that they have had in us in doing well-researched work and kind of in for a penny, in for a pound, going for it, basically.
Any more questions? Yes, Paul.
Many thanks for a brilliant talk, and congratulations to your team and your clients and funders for a brilliant scheme at Richmond and elsewhere. It's almost 50 years ago that the Richmond Society sought to persuade English Heritage or its predecessors to list the station. And had that request been heeded, then a lot of the damage done in the subsequent 40 years would never have happened. Yeah. And your job, I think, would have been much easier. Yeah. The Society and others, with the support from the 20th Century Society, sought listing at more or less 10-year intervals since then. Again, Historic England, or English Heritage, rejected listing. The situation is not helped at the moment because Richmond Council, questionably, has only a few months ago agreed a local plan which provides the redevelopment of the greater part of the station, the decking over the tracks, the platforms, and much else, with high-rise development for office purposes and other uses. Listing is the only way in which protection can be affected unless the client continues to be benign, as South West Trains has been in the support of the Heritage Trust. Given the work you've done and its a brilliant success, how can that be maintained effectively without some kind of management scheme through listing or some other means to ensure the right results? Otherwise, we'll have a repeat of what happened over the 40 years from 1977 onwards. But we do have a very, very real problem because of the council's commitment from October of a few months ago to go for redevelopment of the greater part of the site for high-rise development. Thank you.
Well, it's great work, Paul, that you and the Society have done for decades, drawing attention to Richmond Station. And we hope the well-researched restoration work that we've tried to do will help it be listed one day, bringing a step closer to proper protection like this. If the council does end up wanting to develop the air rights above the station, I hope it's far away, or at least pushed back enough to throw daylight into that lower concourse with that fantastic Scala Regia, that magnificent staircase that goes up to the booking hall, wants to be flooded with natural light. And so just like the challenges that we're facing at Liverpool Street Station with insane air rights developments proposed over it, the station needs to breathe. Thankfully, at Liverpool Street Station, McCaslin and partners have come up with an alternative scheme, pushing that air rights development to the country end of the station to keep the circulation space filled with daylight. And that's what's key here at Richmond. And so while you could make a scheme for developing further on the town end of the station, the terminus really needs daylight. And that lower concourse is just as lovely. And it's clad in faience. It's clad in these fantastic materials, the faience, the stone, the bronze. And Brian from South Western Railway is slowly beginning to clean and refine these things. And one of the things I think has been really a joy is South Western Railway apparently very rarely took the funding from the Railway Heritage Trust, but now are really enthusiastic about it. And so I think the railway companies made a bit of a journey, seeing the benefit. You all enjoy, I hope, the work that we've been doing there. And I think that's really something for South Western Railway. And so we're so surprised to be now working on the downside booking hall at Surbiton, which would be great to open that up. And we're looking at Portsmouth and Southsea Station, this amazing Victorian station at the western end of the line. And so attitudes are changing, perhaps, at least with the South Western Railway. I can't speak for the council, but hopefully the work that we've done and our collective celebration of this station will help protect it in the future, I hope.
Maybe time for us to have another go at getting it listed. Any more questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for the talk. I was talking to some of the contractors at the second reopening, and they were very, very pleased to be there and to see their work so well incorporated. And I wonder, are you able to be developing relationships with further contractors and encouraging them into conservation fields, which previously they weren't into?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I've come to learn as an architect is a massive part of what we do is finding interesting, talented people to make stuff. And so it's great to bring people to these projects who we know are really good, and all of our worries melt away when we're able to get people that we know are good onto our projects. And that was very much the case with the canopy. Once these folk who had been working with on these minarets for mosques, once they were signed up, we knew it was going to be good, and we didn't have to worry about it anymore, which is what you want. I think, thankfully, the estate of railway buildings in the nation is massive, and even though the Railway Heritage Trust don't have very much money, they move across the whole network quite speedily and energetically. And bringing those conservation projects to these stations throughout the nation is helping foster those skills. And so it's up to us architects to kind of connect people up a bit, and us all as people, everyone kind of likes their local railway station, and to see unraveling of all the depredations of the post-war years is a positive thing. And I can't over-recommend the work of the Railway Heritage Trust, and it's worth having a look at their website and seeing what they do. They've celebrated 40 years this past year. They were founded in, the mid-80s by Lord McAlpine, Simon Jenkins, and a number of other really enlightened folk, because railway buildings were under threat in the 70s and 80s, and they're still going strong, and long may they. And I suppose, in contrast to the super expensive schemes like HS2 and stuff, small amounts of money can really be quite powerful in local communities, and the railway stations is a good place to spend that money.
Any more questions? Right, well, you've all been pushed into submission by the erudition of the talk and the sheer verve and vivacity with which you've delivered it. So thank you very much.
My
It's
pleasure.
been- And it's a small...
I'm so grateful to you all, and it's been an honor working on your local station, and really grateful to the Richmond Society for encouraging us at each step along the way. And so, such a pleasure to see you, so many folk here this evening. Thank you all. Oh, thanks.
Apart from something to drink, there's, inside you'll find a book of trees, which we published, of trees in Richmond. So trees may not be your thing compared to railway lines, but should you be in Richmond and wanting a bucolic walk, there'll be something to amuse you.
Aye, thank you much. Thank you.
Now, before you all disappeared, some further thanks are due. First of all, to Lizzie, who's here, and her team, because without them, you wouldn't get any drinks, or indeed, you probably wouldn't get talks. So please thank them. And there is some effort required in carting boxes of wine and so forth and organising events. If there aren't people who can do that, then you won't get drinks. So can I appeal to people who might be interested in helping us to come and put their names forward, come and talk to Lizzie, come and talk to me, because we'd appreciate your help. Now, our next talk is on Wednesday, the 18th of February, and it's here. And it's a panel discussion which is called, Is It All Over for Public Broadcasting? Which, of course, given, I think, constant crises affecting the BBC and various other things, one might wonder. That's going to be a panel discussion by various luminaries from the broadcasting world, chaired by Roger Mosey, who's one of our trustees and who was formerly head of BBC News and BBC Sport. And that's here. And then on Thursday, March the 12th, at the Adult College, which is in Parkshot, round the corner, Tony Kirkham, who was the head of the Arboretum at Kew for many years, is going to be talking on my meeting with remarkable trees. So there are some treats in store for you. And should you want some more to drink, before we're chucked out, the bar is there. So thank you all for coming. And those of you who aren't members of the Richmond Society, who, encouraged by this fantastic talk, might be interested in joining, it's very reasonable. If you're a non-member, it costs £7 to come to a meeting, and for £10 you can join and come free. So on that note, I will wish you good night.